Okay, let's dive into something pretty wild today. What if the language you're hearing right now and the very code that built you, DNA, aren't just vaguely similar? What if they're actually built on the same fundamental principles?
Yeah, it does sound a bit like science fiction, doesn't it? Usually we keep these things totally separate. Language is human stuff, creativity,
Yeah.
DNA is just, well, chemistry,
Right.
biochemistry.
Exactly. But this source we're looking at today, it kind of throws all that out the window. It's a paper proposing something pretty radical, a fundamental unification, a deep connection between biological systems and linguistic systems.
Right. And AI is sort of the key here, the bridge.
Yes, with AI as the key, and it's all rooted in this theory called Odam.
And it's important to stress this paper isn't just finding neat analogies like, oh, that's a bit like that.
Really?
No, it's arguing for something deeper, homologous structures,
Hmm.
essentially. It's saying DNA isn't just like a language, it functions as a symbolic communication system. It encodes how life behaves.
Wow.
And that human language maybe stems from something shared with that biological foundation, something really fundamental.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then.
Yeah.
We need to unpack this incredibly ambitious idea. We're going to explore these, mind-bending parallels the source identifies between the code of life and the code of communication, and try to figure out what it all means, especially, for building AI. AI that doesn't just process information but might actually grasp meaning.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. The paper's core claim, it's not a weak suggestion, it's that DNA is a form of symbolic communication, period. We shouldn't just see it as a biochemical sequence, but understand it as a system encoding biological behavior,
Mhm.
symbolically.
And a key part of this unification hinges on this Odom-Tilly theory, or OT. How does the source explain that part?
Okay, so OT theory, as presented here, it proposes that the basic sounds of language, the phones, they aren't just random noises we decided mean something.
Yep.
The source argues they're actually rooted in really early human sensorimotor experiences. Think physical interactions, gestures, how we first interacted with the world.
So, like, sounds are directly tied to physical actions.
Hmm.
A sound for cut or open or something.
Exactly that. The paper gives specific examples from OT. It suggests M. The M sound is often linked to containment, holding something, maybe inwardness.
Mm-hmm.
That hard K sound is linked to cutting, separation, a sharp action. And A, the ah sound, connects to openness, expansion, maybe a broad gesture. The idea is these sounds have like an inherent meaning derived from physical experience.
That's a really powerful idea, grounding language in physical reality like that.
Yeah.
But how does the paper make the jump from human sounds and gestures to, the silent microscopic world of DNA?
Well, the source builds the case that DNA uses its own basic symbols, A, T, G, C, the nucleotides. And just like OT suggests phonemes encode aspects of physical experience, the paper argues DNA uses these letters and sequences of them to encode biological behavior and function at every level, from a single cell right up to us.
And both systems, they need structure to make sense, right?
Yeah.
Like language needs grammar.
Absolutely. The paper points straight to DNA's codons, those three-letter sequences of nucleotides that code for amino acids or tell the process to start or stop.
The basic words of DNA, almost.
You could think of it that way. It functions like a fundamental grammar unit in DNA. It defines how the basic symbols combine meaningfully. Much like linguistic grammar tells us how sounds form words and sentences.
But meaning isn't just grammar, right? It's context. How does that parallel work for DNA?
This is where the paper, I think, gets really insightful. In DNA, you've got regulatory elements, things like promoters, enhancers, repressors, scattered all over the genome. Now, these aren't part of the gene sequence itself, the part that codes for a protein, but they control when and where a gene gets turned on or off. Essentially, they change the meaning or the outcome of that gene based on its environment inside the genome and the cell.
So context is everything.
Exactly. And the source draws a direct parallel to how semantics work in language. The meaning or function of a word or even a sound can shift dramatically based on the syntax around it, the whole conversation.
They even take it a step further, talking about pragmatics.
They do, yeah. They link it to epigenetic modulation in DNA. These are changes like methylation or histone modification that affect the DNA structure or how it's packaged. They don't change the ATGC sequence.
But they change how it's read.
Precisely. They change how the genetic message is interpreted and acted upon by the cell. It's all about the interpretation based on cues, internal and external. Very much like pragmatics in language, where we figure out meaning based on the situation, who's speaking, what we both already know.
So, Okay, the source isn't just spotting surface similarities. It's arguing for these deep functional parallels in how these two systems encode and interpret information. Let's zoom in on those deep parallels the paper emphasizes. First up was syntax and modularity.
Right. The argument here is that both systems are built hierarchically. Language goes from sounds to words, phrases, sentences. You know the drill.
Uh-huh.
DNA goes from nucleotides to codons. Codons make up genes. Genes are organized on chromosomes within this incredibly complex genome. Both show this hierarchical structure. Both allow for recursion, maybe less obviously in DNA than language. But think about regulatory networks influencing each other.
Structures within structure.
Exactly. And strong compositionality. The meaning or function of the whole thing depends critically on how the parts are arranged.
And you mentioned contextual semantics earlier. That's another key parallel.
Oh, it's central. The paper really hammers this point, drawing on OT. Meaning isn't fixed. It's incredibly context-dependent. A gene's function, its meaning for the cell, isn't just in its sequence. Its activation, suppression, how it interacts with other genes, that all depends on where it is in the genome, what transcription factors are around, the cell state, environmental signals, the whole context.
Which perfectly mirrors language, where a word's meaning shifts based on the sentence and situation.
Perfectly. And then there's the idea of redundancy and efficiency, which sounds a bit contradictory at first, right?
How can it be both?
Well, it points to the pressures they faced over evolution. Both systems need to be robust, resistant to noise and errors, but also convey information efficiently. Language uses things like repetition, sometimes for emphasis or metaphor, to pack a lot of meaning into few words. Genomes. They have vast non-coding regions that aren't junk. They're likely crucial for regulation. They have sophisticated repair mechanisms for DNA damage, sometimes duplicate copies of important genes. The source argues these aren't just random features, they're properties you'd expect in symbolic systems that evolved to be resilient in messy, unpredictable environments.
It's fascinating, this unified view, linking abstract communication right down to the physical code of life. But the source isn't just drawing theoretical lines. It has a pretty sharp critique of current AI, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It looks at the big models we have now, GPT, AlphaFold, the genomic language models like GenSLMs. And while it gives them credit for what they can do, the paper argues they're basically operating at a statistical and syntactic level.
Meaning they're great at spotting patterns.
Exceptionally good. Predicting the next word, predicting how a protein folds, predicting the next base pair in a sequence. They learn the grammar and the statistical likelihoods from vast amounts of data.
But they don't get the meaning. Is that the argument?
That's the core of the critique. They master the structure, the relationships between symbols, the syntax. But according to this paper, they lack a real understanding of the intrinsic meaning encoded within those symbols, the semantics. Especially meaning grounded in the physical world and biological function, like OT suggests for language.
So to get to real understanding, AI needs more than just pattern matching.
It needs a semantic layer. Especially if we want AI to help us understand complex domains like biology, not just predict sequences.
Which leads directly to their proposed solution. This new class of AI they call semantic integrative models, or SIMs.
Right. A SIM, the whole idea is an AI designed specifically to bridge these domains, genetics and linguistics, by decoding meaning, not just structure. It wouldn't just see patterns. It would theoretically interpret the underlying symbolic message using this unified Odam-inspired framework.
Okay, so what would an AI like that actually need to be able to do, according to the paper?
They lay out several key capabilities. First, it needs to basically embed those OT phonosemantic principles into its natural language processing.
So build in the idea that sounds have inherent physical meaning.
Exactly. Ground its language understanding in those proposed primal links. Second, it needs to be able to cross-map DNA sequences with these symbolic linguistic structures directly.
So like finding direct equivalences?
Yeah.
Saying this regulatory bit in DNA functions like this kind of instructional phrase in language.
That's the idea. And crucially, multi-domain learning. Not just learning about language or biology separately. It needs to learn the functional and cognitive parallels across them, recognizing the same deep semantic operations happening in both systems.
Building an AI like that sounds incredibly complex. Does the source break down what components you'd need?
It does. It lists 4 essential pieces. First, phonosemantic encoding, like we said, building the AI's language foundation on those empirical sound meaning mappings from OT, baking in that physical grounding.
Okay, step 1, embed the sound meaning link.
Step 2, biological syntax parsing. This means going beyond just reading DNA letters. It means translating those sequences, codons, regulatory regions, gene interactions, the whole genomic structure into meaningful semantic structures, understanding the function behind the DNA grammar.
Right. Interpreting the biological intent of the code.
Exactly. Third component, contextual causality modeling. The sim has to get that meaning and function depend heavily on context in both areas. So it needs to model how the surrounding DNA sequence or cellular environment changes the outcome, just like conversational context changes word meaning. It needs to predict outcomes based on that context.
Makes sense. And the fourth piece.
Cross-symbolic reasoning. This is really the core of the whole integration idea. The AI needs to learn, identify, and apply equivalencies between messages in language and messages in biology. It has to realize that the fundamental ways of encoding, sending, and interpreting meaning are shared, so it can act as a translator, bridging these disciplines we currently see as separate.
Thinking about all this, these parallels, and AI that could bridge them, it really does open up some massive philosophical questions, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the source definitely goes there. If language grows out of our physical sensor motor experience and DNA is a symbolic code for behavior, well, it forces you to ask some deep things. Like, is language just a reflection of our deeper biological evolution? Is DNA itself a kind of unconscious symbolic logic, a language life uses without needing conscious thought?
And the big one for AI. Can it ever truly understand intent or meaning if meaning is so deeply tied to this embodied biological symbolism?
Exactly. If current AI is just mastering syntax and statistics, can it ever reach this semantic level that the paper suggests comes from merging OT and biology? The paper points out this framework just dissolves old academic boundaries. You need biology, linguistics, AI, philosophy, all talking to each other.
Okay, so let's assume hypothetically someone could build this semantic integrative model AI. What does the paper see as the practical payoff? Where could this unified understanding actually make a difference?
They outline some really exciting potential applications. In biomedicine, for instance, it could completely change how we interpret the semantic meaning of non-coding DNA. You know, the 98% of our genome, often called junk.
But it probably isn't junk at all.
Exactly. It likely holds crucial instructions. Understanding its language could lead to massive breakthroughs in diagnostics, maybe even new therapies.
Reading the hidden instructions in our own code. What else?
Education. It suggests we could teach science and language differently, not as separate subjects, but using unified symbolic frameworks. Imagine making complex biology concepts more intuitive by showing how they link to language structures students already grasp.
Showing kids that the rules of a sentence and the rules of a gene aren't worlds apart. Interesting.
Yeah. Then for AI design itself, this approach offers a potential path to AI models that are safer and more explainable.
How so?
Because their understanding would be grounded in interpretable meaning, based on OT and biology rather than just complex, opaque statistics. You could potentially trace why the AI reached a conclusion. And finally, cognitive modeling. It provides a framework to connect human thought, speech, and our underlying biology, potentially revealing deep connections in how our minds and bodies work together as one system.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the core takeaway from this source seems to be human language, our speech, and the genetic code. They aren't just vaguely similar. The paper calls them semantically homologous architectures shaped by nature. Both are systems for building, transmitting, and evolving meaning.
Right. And the paper's conclusion is pretty forceful. For AI to get to genuine understanding, it has to go beyond just mimicking patterns and predicting sequences. It needs to grasp this deep, unified, symbolic meaning that, according to the source, underlies both language and life itself.
And they don't just frame this convergence OT theory AI bioinformatics. It's just, an interesting research path. They use that really strong phrase, an ontological necessity.
An ontological necessity,
Yeah.
yeah. The idea that unifying our understanding of these fundamental codes isn't just a good idea, it's potentially essential if we want to truly grasp what life, language, and intelligence actually are.
It really leaves you with a lot to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
If our DNA really does hold a kind of unconscious logic, and our language is rooted so deeply in our physical, biological being, how profoundly would our view of ourselves, of communication, even of what's possible with AI change if we could actually learn to speak and understand this single underlying language of life and meaning? That's a powerful thought to sit with.